What color do you think I should change my hair to?
And action.
Well, shalom, everybody. We're ready to get started with our Midrash. Before we do, though, we need to acknowledge that we have enjoyed some food together. The title of the slide is "We've eaten and we're satisfied." If you join for the reading of Devarim 8, verse 10. So you'll eat and be satisfied. You'll bless Adonai your God for the good land He has given us. Let's do that. Abba, we have eaten and we're satisfied. We thank you for the land. It's in Yeshua's name we thank you. Amen.
Amen.
They've arrived. We start the minute we start.
Told you.
Okay.
They arrived.
That's all right. You said. Start it. Okay.
It's like blowing a shofar.
Why don't you go in there?
It's quieter.
First slide is the Aliyot.
I'm not sure what your hand
All right, so this is what we read today from 37:1 to 48:23. This is one of my favorite Torah portions because of association between Yosef and Mashiach. So this is the first verse, and for the English on this, I chose to use the Geneva Bible from 1560. Yaakov now dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. Okay, so looking back, previous Torah portion, this is from Vayyesheiv 27. May people serve you. This is Isaac blessing Jacob. May people serve you, nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. So, master of your brothers. In this context, how many brothers did Jacob have?
Many.
Well, I think this is a case of brothers being a euphemism for
Kinsman.
kinsmen. Yeah, achot. Because we look at it in terms of brothers, well, he had lots of kinsmen, but really a singular brother,
Right.
Esau.
I'd say Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom,
Shalom.
but I'll save it and say
Shavua
Tov.
Tov. There's still a little bit up there, I think, some sorts.
Any more coming?
No, not for now.
Okay.
Any more food coming in?
Not for now. What?
No.
You didn't bring food? Open the door and let them out. All right, let's go.
Well, this was one of the answers to the fun quiz, or is the answer to the question of how old was Yosef at this start of the narrative. It's 17 years, as shown in green font on the slide. But what this slide shows two different words spelled the same with the letters, only differing by the pointing of vowels or the pronunciation of the word. The word, and the first one that's next to pasturing is ro'eh, which it is kind of common, or at least popular within some Messianic congregations for their leadership to be called ro'eh. So what would be another word that you could a leadership position that might be translated as ro'eh? In other words, ro'eh would translate to what exactly? Shepherd, right? So what's another equivalent English word? Pastor. It's the same meaning. It's different word, of course. Pastor different from shepherd. Or pastor is different from shepherd, but only in the root of the word, not in the meaning of it. So a pastor is someone who pastors a flock, just like a shepherd is one who shepherds a flock. Same basic thing. But if you notice in blue in the bottom.
Hang on just one second. Hey, kids. If you're gonna play a game, maybe you should go down to the Zion.
What do you have there, Constance?
They're lost, they have no leader. Naomi, you're in charge. Don't beat anybody up.
Do we have to?
You don't have to go.
Leave the food.
But you can't stay here and make noise during our Midrash. That's the point.
Well, if you notice on the slide, the letters Resh, Ein, Hey are both in both words there at the top where it says pasturing and bad. So spelled the same, except for the different vowel pointings. How do you tell the difference betwixt the two?
Context.
Context is correct. Potentially, things could be, you have to sort of look at it and see what the right context is to make sure you're translating and understanding it correctly. Here's a lexicon entry for the latter of those entries. The word ra'ah comes from the word ra, which is evil or wicked in some cases. It's not related to the same, in English, the same word for the Egyptian god, Ra. It's not the same as that. But how do you tell when it's evil versus in the third definition, misery, trouble, or disaster? Again, it's the same word.
When pastoring doesn't make sense in the sentence, obviously.
Well, when pastoring doesn't make sense, but sometimes evil doesn't make sense when it could be also translated as disaster or trouble. For example, in Jeremiah 51, the context here, I'll read the text and then you can tell me what's the context. I will dispatch foreigners to Babylon that they may winnow her and devastate her land. For on every side they will be opposed to her in the day of her Ra'ah. So in this context, calamity or disaster would be good terms. And in this case, and there's other, I think.
I could also see that as being written as in her day of evil, or because an evil day can be just reminiscent of a disaster.
I suppose, but when you think of wickedness or the moral evil, that's not what's going on in this case.
We're not talking moral evil here, but
And it's the case of where Babylon. This is kind of from the perspective of Babylon. Like they did moral evil, they're experiencing as a result calamity after that. You can see that with regard to Israel as well. For example, here in Isaiah 55, explain this then. I form the light and I create the darkness. I make well-being, or shalom, and I create disaster, Ra. I, Yahweh, do all these things. So if you translated it as I create well-being, I create shalom, and I create moral evil, that doesn't really make sense in terms of Yah's other attributes. And so since the word Ra or Ra'ah can mean disaster, it's, I think, best understood to mean disaster in this context based on those experiencing it. Because if you don't do that, if you have Yah as some sort of yin yang in the sky, where you have him doing both good and moral evil, it would be hard to have him accuse you of doing moral evil when he's also moral evil in itself. So creating disaster is as a result of typically you doing something that may deserve it, for example. And so that's what...
Are there any other Hebrew words that mean disaster?
I'm not sure. There may be other ones that mean similar things, some parallel meanings of that. You see this word as disaster or in context of disaster quite a bit in the text. A lot in, in the prophets is where I've seen it more often.
Because it almost seems like this is the parallel of you've done evil, therefore this disaster, using the same word,
Right.
has come. That's why I was wondering if there was another word meaning disaster that is separate from
Yeah,
evil
Hamas.
that was done.
Hamas means violence, typically. In this case, looking at it this way, you could say, I think, like in a Good News translation, you would say something like, I reward and I punish. Might be another way to say this. This is talking about his creation. I bring about these things. But creating moral evil would be putting Yah in the context of a murderer or a serial killer or something like that, which doesn't align with his other attributes. Okay, so our text says in the second verse of our portion, this translation says these are the records of the generations of Yaakov. Generations is the word there, toldot. You recognize that. You see that quite a bit. Other translations for generations would be things like history. I've seen story even for there. But history or generations are there. And so the interesting thing from this is these are the generations of Jacob. And who should it start with?
Joseph.
No, it does start with Joseph. But if these are the generations of Jacob, it should start with Reuben, right?
Reuben.
Right.
His firstborn. But it doesn't. It starts with Yosef, which sort of, this is the second verse of the portion, we get the hint that Joseph is the selectee to be the heir of Yaakov. The chosen, yeah, because not only do we see him listed first here, these are the generations of, we also see, of course, in the vignette about the multicolored or the long sleeve robe. So this is an indicator. So we can, the question I have at the bottom of the slide, well, we talked about this in the last slide. Joseph brought back a bad report, a Ra report about them to their father. Was Joseph right to bring a bad report about his brothers?
What was the bad report?
We're not really told what the bad report was. We see
It
later.
was a true report, and they were doing bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, he tattled on them, but it was what he needed to do if he was to do right.
We see later that Joseph was trusted because the second vignette about going to tell the status of your brothers is clear that this is a couple verses later that Joseph was the trusted son to go and bring back. In other words, you are my eyes and ears. You go and bring this back to me, which I think shows that Joseph's status as the truth teller, the trustworthy son, is shown here in this passage, as well as later on when he's sent again to go down and bring back a report about his brothers. So another way to ask this would be, was Joseph wise to bring back the bad report about his brothers? I think the answer to that depends on perspective.
Depends on what it was, what the bad news was.
Well, I would say it may depend less on that in terms of wisdom. I would say it'd be two parts. On one side of it, as we'll see, Joseph has a dream, right? What does the dream say? I do have a slide that covers this, but what's the dream? It's that all of his brothers, his family, are going to bow down to him. So this, as the special son, the selected son, the dream about about everyone bowing down to him, including his father. What does that tell us about Joseph? I think it tells us that he is a little bit, I don't know if naive is the right word, but he's willing to tell whatever he's telling because it's the truth, no matter what the consequence. Maybe he just doesn't understand that his brothers will envy him greatly. And as the text says, they hated him because of that. I mean, when you think about it, if you're Joseph and there's lots of evidence you've been selected to be the heir. If your name isn't Joseph and you're a son of Jacob, then you are what?
Second class son.
You are, yes, you're a son still, but your value is far below this upstart, right?
Johnny come lately.
Yeah. So the Ketzonet Pasim, or the multicolored robe, or the varicolored tunic, how the New American reads here, New American Standard. It's also translated as other times as long robe, long sleeve robe, or even fine woolen coat. So that, as we already kind of discussed and agreed upon, Joseph here is being treated as Joseph's heir, and the robe is just another indicator that he is the favorite son and has been selected to be his heir. Now, we read elsewhere that Reuben was deselected from that because of sexual sin, essentially, and so he lost his place because of that. And Joseph, of course, is the firstborn of the loved wife also, right? He's the firstborn of who? Of Rachel, right? Because Leah is the mother of others.
The life you wanted in the first place.
The wife he made the bargain to buy, or to have the right to marry. So this is from 37:4-5. His brothers saw that their father loved him, as in Joseph, more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. So he was already hated before he gave them the dream. And they perhaps hated him because his father loved him more. And the key part of this dream, if we see Joseph as a dreamer, it's in the last section down there in verse 7. Behold, they were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. So if you're already hated by your brothers, how would that sort of phraseology?
Here he goes again.
And Dad believes him too.
Yeah, they hated him so much they wanted to kill him.
Yeah.
And even though they wanted to kill him, some of them still had the sense to say, yeah, we better not do that. It would be nice.
So verse 8 picks up, then his brother said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? Are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dream and for his words. So it's not just the dream that gets them. It's also sort of him telling them about the dream that makes them riled up and angry. So Yah was showing Joseph a prophetic vision of what would happen in the future, as it is written. It's as again, this is from our Haftorah this week. It says, surely Adonai Yahweh does nothing unless he reveals his secret counsel to his servants, the prophets. And it seems to me this is perhaps why this Haftorah was chosen to go along with this Torah portion, precisely because of this single verse within the book of Amos that we read today. So he has a second dream, another dream. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars are bowing down to me, related to his father and to his brothers. So this is a kind of, would you say this is parallel to his other dream? This is stars bowing down. The previous one was sheaves bowing down. So they're both, I think, in parallel here. His dad rebukes him, though, here. He says, shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? Now, it's kind of an odd question in my view, right? Because by this point,
She wasn't there.
his mother had already passed away.
couldn't have been because Benjamin hadn't been born because Joseph didn't know about Benjamin when they came down to visit him, or when they finally came down to Egypt.
I think we'll find that he did know about Benjamin.
He did. Because he asks about him.
We'll get to that next. I think it's next portion.
Next portion, yeah.
But, and so this, in terms of time wise, I mean, if Ben is correct on this, then that'd be right and say that it's the case. But this kind of shows that his vision wasn't accurate in the sense that not everything in it actually came to pass, right? I mean, in the sense that his mother didn't live to bow down to him because his mother didn't make it to Egypt, whereas the other ones. Because you can see that this is really looking forward to a time when Yosef is second command to Pharaoh, and they're all coming before him to to bow down to him, and not necessarily worship him, but to acknowledge his stature as the representative of the Egyptian government. So 37:11, there's two different passages here. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. And his brothers envied him, but his father guarded the word. So it's the two translations here are kept the saying in mind. Then in mind is added to the text, but guarded the word. What is that? What do both these kind of tell us? What his father did?
Sounds something similar to New Testament, where and Mary pondered all this in her heart.
Mm-hmm. In other words, it was a difficult teaching, perhaps a strange teaching, but at the same time, it was not outrightly discounted.
Sit on it and see what comes to bear.
Yeah. So in verses 12 and 13, we see Yosef as a shliach. Then his brothers went to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Israel said to the Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said to Yaakov, "I will go." So this, in my view, teaches that Joseph's faith in his son proves that the bad report that he reported on previously was valid. And that was a true thing that he was reporting on. Because he wouldn't have continued to, if the bad report was inaccurate, he would not have continued to trust him. But he did, and so he sends him down to check on the status of his brothers.
Mm-hmm.
So in 37:14, go now and see about the welfare of your brothers and the welfare of the flock, and bring back word to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So what is puzzling about this passage?
Is that where they were? Was it the Valley of Hebron?
Well, that's where they're being sent from there. So,
Well, we all know what ties the Jacob's sons had to Shechem. It's just kind of strange that they're going back to that same place.
well, their party's not a big,
That whole thing
not a
of
big
going
threat
back to
anymore.
the scene
They're
of crime or something like that.
not a big threat there anymore.
No. Do you think it means that they might have absorbed that into their territory? Like maybe they felt a sense of ownership over that area?
It doesn't. I mean, it seems like it's open range grazing of the flock. But what's puzzling to me about this passage is that Hebron was not in a valley. Hebron was a mountain, and this is what ancient Hebron looks like. You see, it's elevated and raised up. But even more interesting is this is if you there are a lot of Bible atlases online that you can look up, and they give actually coordinates for places. And on this Bible atlas I used for Valley of Hebron, it had a KML file for using Google Earth. You click on that and it brings you right here to this picture. And so you can possibly see on this, but Valley of Hebron again is on high ground around the city of Hebron. So why is it called a valley? Now, it's a possibility that there is some place that is heretofore unknown that was a valley within the mountain area. But no one has seemed to have conclusively found anything. There's actually like 3 different places where different authors, different traditions about where Hebron is, but the at least an ancient idea of it, and has really come from the time, at least of the Midrash, which has looked at it as, this is a mountain, not a valley. You can see the valley, if you will, on the screen to the right of where it says Hebron. That would be the Jordan Valley. So it can't be, that's, no one would confuse the Jordan Valley with the Valley of Hebron. You can see that kind of running down there. Beersheba to the south, and over there, further over would be where Shechem is located. So the question is,
can the term that was used be interpreted as anything else?
I'm glad you asked that question, because it seems like the word there for valley and mech can also be understood with those same 3 letters to be amok, which means deep or profound. And so, at least from the time of the Midrash in Genesis Rabbah, here's what the rabbis have said, some of them have said, but it is to be understood that he sent him, and Jacob sent Joseph from the deep counsel of the righteous man who was buried in Hebron, i.e. Abraham, to fulfill what was said to Abraham between the parts. So what does that mean, between the parts? What's that?
When God walked between the...
When the smoke and the fire walked
Right.
between there, and Abraham didn't, right? So that's an understanding of that. Mine is, I would say, I agree that it's not really a valley. That the valley points were not added by Moshe, right? They were not added at the time. So if you look at it in the same way, as particularly looking at how many parallels there are between Yosef and Messiah. And I think that's the deep and profound mystery that's being said, because starting with, it kind of goes from, this is the start, the prelude to everything. And from his time leaving Jacob rather, and going down to find his brothers, this is where the story really starts. It's part A, he's with his father, and part B, he's sent from his father, and everything happens after that. And the next slide shows a handful of the parallels, and there are plenty of other ones out there. Yosef had prophecy that he made, and to a large degree it did come true, except for his mother. He was sent from his father, so he was a sent one from his father, Shliach. He was sent to check the status of his brethren, or his kinsmen. He was hated, thrown into a pit, and assumed dead. His father was told he was dead. Of course, in Joseph's case, Yeshua, of course, was dead and then wasn't. He, not being dead, surprised his brothers. Second command to Pharaoh, whereas you can look at Yeshua as second in command to his father. And Joseph is called, one translation of what Zafnak Paneach means, we'll see that, I think it's next Torah portion, is in Egyptian, bread man of life. And Yeshua, of course, comes from a town called House of Bread. He did miracles with bread. Just in some ways, you can say, just as miraculously.
The bread of life.
Yes. And called himself the bread of life. Yeah. And so a man found him. It's interesting that the word here, matzah, doesn't, in this context, it doesn't mean bread, but it means found. The root of the word is to be found. But the interesting thing isn't in finding a word similar to matzah in this text, but it is what? Well, it's that somebody, a man, was close enough to his brothers to hear their counsel. They're probably not announcing it, on social media saying we're going to Dothan. They're not saying it. They're not shouting to each other, "Hey, where do you want to go?" Dothan. What? The one in Alabama? No. How do you know? Well, my opinion is that this was a malach that was there. An angel was there to overhear it, because the angel will say, or whoever, this man told Joseph, and Joseph went, because Joseph has a mission. His mission involves finding his brothers. If he doesn't find his brothers, his mission doesn't even start, right? His mission is actually to be what? His mission is to go to Egypt to help Israel survive.
Right.
If he doesn't find his brothers, his mission doesn't even start. And I don't think it's necessarily that unusual in biblical context for a man found him to not be necessarily talking about a man, because that's the same terminology of the one who wrestled, right, with Jacob. Said he wrestled with the man until sunrise. We find later that probably wasn't just a man. All right, continue on. This man, Rashi says this was Gabriel, quoting where the book of Daniel says the man Gabriel, quoting Daniel as saying that, and Targum Jonathan identifies it as Gabriel. It doesn't necessarily have to be Gabriel, but something miraculous, something angelic, something not normal, I think, was the intervention here, to hear the private conversations of his brothers.
Mm-hmm.
But what do they say? Let's kill him. Let's kill him. That was the ultimate thing. When they got together, here comes this dreamer. Let's kill him. Throw him into the pit. And what were they trying to do? Stop his dreams, right? Then let's see what becomes of his dreams. Well, they want to stop his dreams, but they really want to stop what? His dreams coming true, right? They don't want to stop him from dreaming. They want to stop him from predicting that he will rule over them. And so they try to kill him of sorts. They say, let's kill him. They plotted against him to put him to death, but in fact, they didn't kill him, right? They didn't kill him. His father thought he was dead, but he wasn't. So is there a parallel between that and our passage in Matthew near the end of Yeshua's earthly ministry? It said, and some of the men stood by when they heard and said, he calls for Eliyahu. And one of them ran right away and took the sponge and filled it with vinegar and put it into his and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. But the other said, let us see if Eliyahu come to deliver him. So the idea here, in terms of why it could be a parallel, it's if we do this to him, if he dies, if he's being executed, let's see if his what he prophesied would come true. And they're saying, okay, now that we've sold Joseph into slavery, let's see if his dreams come true now. He's as good as dead. So another potential parallel between Joseph and Yeshua. So here's some photos of the area of Joseph's well is shown here. A picture near Lake Tiberias and the plain of Dothan. Another Joseph's well photo here. Bedouins and camels in the early 20th century. But Reuben intervenes, saying, shed no blood. It seems that Reuben's plan was to later come back and rescue him from the pit. Perhaps he was trying to redeem himself as doing something righteous in terms of being like a firstborn son would do.
The one who saved Daddy's favorite.
Daddy, I saved your favorite son. Am I your firstborn again? Maybe. But we can sort of see that too. I mean, later on, remember, he volunteers to send one of his sons in place of Benjamin. Right. But that was overruled by, if you will, a better offer by Yehuda doing sort of the same thing, standing up from his, turning away from his visiting of prostitutes to go and sending himself to go and send himself in place of Benjamin instead of Reuben's son, sending himself.
Yeah.
So, but what Judah says is, okay, let's sell him. So always, perhaps this is.
And it would be about all money to a Jew.
See, that's exactly. That's where this the idea comes from. Is that Yehuda is always trying to profit to make money.
Yeah.
That would be a slur probably, but it does
Yeah.
seem like what's going on.
You never let a good crisis go to waste.
Well, guy who said that did serve in the IDF, so. So chapter 39 brings us to Potiphar. He being sold from the Ishmaelites. He was brought to Egypt and bought, if you will. Sold by the Ishmaelim to the Egyptians, the Midianites to the Egyptians. And so here's that a phrase that's often translated as captain of the guard, but it can also be just as the chief executioner, the chief slaughterer. But it's typically more often translated as something like captain of the guard, captain of Pharaoh's bodyguard. So the idea of being captain of something means that he was a person of importance, whatever the word there, tabak, would translate to, as executioner or as guardsman or bodyguard. But Yosef, just like we read about Noach, verse 4 here, Yosef found chen in his eyes, favor, or how might you rather translate that as? How would you translate chen?
Grace.
Yeah. And he attended him and he appointed him over his household, whatever he placed in his custody. So even though, it's interesting, verse 3, his master perceived that Hashem or Yahweh was with him, and whatever he did, Yahweh made succeed through him. So it's interesting that Pharaoh's bodyguard had enough spiritual understanding to see, according to text, that Yah was with Joseph. We see in verse 2 here that it's true, but the perception that Potiphar understood that as well. So this chen, or could be a favor or grace. First use was back, as I mentioned, with Noach. Noach found chen in the sight of Adonai. Remember that chen is one of those words where it's kind of it could be a play on words, because Noach, reverse is those same two letters. Instead of having het nun, it would be nun het. Het nun sofit nun het. So, Potiphar's wife. What's wrong with Potiphar's wife anyway? No, she just likes Joseph, right? Excuse me, let me get refill my Java. What do you think about her then, in the sense that, what would be the world's wisdom in this case? I think the world's wisdom might say, go for it. But that would be polar opposite of his mission, right? had he fallen to that, what would have happened to his mission? Would he have? He might have been thrown in prison,
Well.
or he might have been executed. If such thing is,
More likely, if he'd actually gone through with it, it would have been an execution. Pretty sure Potiphar knew that something was not right. It doesn't say he was angry with Joseph.
well, I think that had he gone through with it and then later been caught, it would have been portrayed as by force, right, and not willingly, because that would implicate his wife. That would not fly, right? Never would an Egyptian be on the same level as a Hebrew slave in that sense.
And I would have to believe the mission would be passed off to someone else.
Yeah, I think that's the case. It would been, Joseph would have been along the same route, perhaps, as Reuben. And maybe it would have been somehow figured out that Reuben or Judah would have done it, but it'd be a completely different Exodus story had it been had he failed in this mission. Now, we see that this is how the commentators talk about this. Is Joseph spent a year in Potiphar's service, according to Seder Olam. As verse 6 states, Joseph was exceedingly handsome, which in the plain sense sets the stage for the lust of Potiphar's wife, according to Ramban, Nachmanides. But as Rashi notes from the Midrash, once he became a success in his master's home, Joseph became preoccupied with his appearance and began to curl his hair. What? God said, your father is mourning and you curl your hair. I will incite the bear, Potiphar's wife, against you. Okay, so this sort of, at the part where it says, Rashi notes about the Midrash, once he became a success in his master's home, then it sort of goes off the rails, I think, here. I find nothing in the text to give any credence to him curling his hair.
He was high on Rashi at that time.
Yes.
Well, he would have had to keep up appearances because he's the head slave.
But
Still
But
big time
because he's been a
speculation.
slave, he also had lots of work to do,
Right.
which means he only kept up appearances because he was told to, not because.
It does seem like he was the inside guy, not an outside guy, though.
Yeah.
So perhaps something to do with his appearances may have been the case, but I think the bottom line here is we're not told about him curling his hair to bring about the lust of Potiphar's wife. He might have been, flexing his muscles or something with his tunic off or something. I don't know.
But nonetheless, these
This is
revered words of Rashi should not be so revered, in my opinion. There's no evidence of it. It's just personal opinion.
okay. Keep your to yourself.
Silly Rashi.
Now, here's Rashi's additional comment. It says, the close proximity of the narratives of Tamar and Potiphar's wife indicates that both women had pure motives. Both of them desired to found families in Israel. So I think that even gives, that sort of says that, Tamar, yeah. Rashi is wrong, I think wrong on Potiphar's wife here. Potiphar's wife had foreseen by astrological signs that she was destined to be the ancestress of children by Joseph, but she didn't know whether she or her daughter would have the children. According to tradition, Joseph married her daughter. Potiphar is who he married.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the idea, or the last comment of this is that, or the source for the comment of Potiphar and the similarity between the names of Potiphar is that he must have married their daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we don't know that for sure, but that has a little bit of grounding, at least in the similarities of the name. Whereas her astrological signs and all that kind of stuff sort of tells me.
I would suspect this was a habit of hers with other servants.
It could be.
Kind of sounds like they're trying to even things out and spread the blame out, make it where it wasn't really anybody's fault. But it just kind of seems like a pretty obvious open and shut case that she was just kind of an unfaithful woman and Joseph was just kind of in a terrible
And
predicament.
just the fact that Joseph was thrown in prison and not executed shows that he knew there was, and he knew there was a problem with his wife, but if he called her out on it, it would.
In their marriage.
It would hurt their marriage and stain his reputation.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Probably more about his reputation than.
Yeah, I think it was a habit with her, and he was well aware of it.
Well, if for Rashi's words here to be accurate about her desiring to make families in Israel, it would be a problem. I think there's a problem there because, right, what was her response? Was it her response to say something like that or give any indication of that? No, her response was to lie about it, right? To lie about essentially her lustful behavior. It wasn't about starting a family in Israel. It was about lusting for Joseph.
I think this comment here, he missed the point. Tamar and Potiphar, yeah, Potiphar's wife, those two stories, yeah, they are kind of parallel, but they're mirror opposites of what Tamar did what was right, and Potiphar's wife went out of her way to do what was wrong. So I think it's a comparison, but not a, yeah, there is no pure motives in Potiphar's wife's situation.
She was supposed to be.
Well,
And that wouldn't happen.
whatever Tamar did, it's arguable whether it was right. But one thing we do know from that is that the line of Mashiach goes through that, the birth of those twins from Herod.
And Judah even says, "You're more righteous in this than I was."
Well, true, but his actions weren't all that righteous, so it was a pretty low
In
bar.
other words,
Yeah, it was a pretty low bar.
it was right. I mean, she was supposed to be, her seed was supposed to come from
Right.
that family.
Yeah.
And he wasn't, the guy who could make it happen wasn't doing anything about it.
Right. So if you look at it saying, now what if, I mean, levirate marriage and what was, supposed to be being brought out was, if it was financially costly to the second son. The reason why he didn't fulfill his mission or his duties really was he would have had to be bringing up somebody else's son.
That's it. Responsibility he may not have wanted.
Yeah. Well, I can't afford this. So, chapter 39, verse 9. In this house, I am his equal. He hasn't withheld anything from me, except yourself, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? The root word there is chata. You see that there, which is the general term for sin. It's not wickedness per se, and it's just the general word for sin. From 1 John 3:4, we know that sin is defined as violation of the Torah. How did Joseph know that this thing was sin? The Torah hadn't been given on this subject, right?
Well,
Which
you say
means
that-
it was more like an instinctual thing,
say that in Genesis too.
something that felt in the spirit.
Except the Torah did exist, it just hadn't been written down.
Hadn't been codified.
Right.
And when it
God
was
had made it
codified,
little known.
when it was codified, God added a little more to it.
Right. He added some details.
Well, suffice it to say that even at this time, Yosef was well aware that fornication and or adultery were forbidden.
Well, look at when they tried, a couple of them tried to pass their wives off as sisters to the kings.
Yeah.
And
Even those pagan kings said, "What are you trying to do?
Yeah.
Get us destroyed?" They knew it was a no-no.
So this would probably fall into the category of the types of Torah commandments. That is what? The type that it's obvious.
Well, doesn't, I mean, going back to the whole Judah Tamar thing, Reuben and his problems, I mean, his family, Joseph's family had already kind of felt the ill effects of these
Of
types
sexual sin, yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
these types of sin. He seemed, as far as he knows, Reuben was disinherited for that. So, and Judah brought shame on them. I mean, it's just all. It seems like he's lived long enough to see that the end of this is not going to be a good thing.
That's a good point. So, some lessons learned here, life application of this vignette. Men, don't minister to women by yourself. Women, don't minister to men by yourself. I think it's a good ministry application.
But that wasn't a ministry scenario. That was a servant master scenario.
I'm just saying life application to this, because you're probably not going to become a servant of somebody. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, mine doesn't say that none of the men of the household were there. It says none of the household servants were there.
Which we both know that.
Oh.
She made sure nobody was there, which is why she said, which is why she could get away with saying, "Oh, I screamed for help," because nobody was
That's
there
an
to hear
interesting
her.
thought. You mean she set
So
it up
possible
quite
Oh yeah,
premeditated?
oh
That would
very
make
much
sense,
so.
yeah.
All the if they had a field or something, it would make a lot of sense to why a lot of, especially if it was harvest time. Would you dare to do that?
Doesn't say.
I don't know.
You mean
It would
it
explain to why.
was
all the
planned for
men
why
of
no
the
why few were in the
servants
house and
said
people were outside,
yes,
yeah, out working.
Because all the servants would have been in the field.
So we're told from 1 Corinthians 16:13, be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. So in situations like this, we're going to be like Joseph regarding sexual temptation. Joseph does what? He doesn't stand firm. He runs away, right? Runs for his life.
Where's his curled hair?
Well, that's why the band is around it, to keep it flat. In the back, you can see where the hair straighteners are. So a good strategy is distance. Flee from sexual immorality, flee the evil desires of youth, and run away. So one thing that we discussed today in prison was he did everything right except what?
Left his coat
Yeah, he
behind.
left evidence behind. That's what you don't want to do, right?
Leave it to the prisoners to think of that.
Yeah.
That evidence.
Okay, so we see this. We previously saw a favor listed. Verse 21 here, chapter 39:21 says, "But Adonai was with Yosef, showing him chesed and giving him chen in the sight of the prison warden." The warden made Yosef supervisor of the prisoners. He was in charge of it.
What we would call
I'm
today the
wondering how
head.
long he was in there for this part.
How long did it take to get to begin? Yeah. Don't
Because
know.
it mentions 2 years, but it doesn't mention that until later. So we don't know how long he was in there before the two with the dreams came in.
Yeah, I'll go back a slide here to this. We don't. This I don't know. I have a slide that covers it. We don't really have an idea of how long, within the time frame here, how long it happened, or how long it was before he became the head of the prisoner, so to speak. He became a trustee,
Head trustee.
head trustee. Yep. Pharaoh was enraged at his two courtiers, the chamberlain of the cupbearers and the chamberlain of the bakers. And he placed him in the ward of the house of the chamberlain of the butchers. This is Archroll. In the prison, so the same. They pronounce butchers. We've previously said as what? Bodyguard, potentially as bodyguard or as head guard. Seems to me that it'd be more likely to be a guard that you have folks in prison that you're in charge of versus butchers, because butchers typically aren't the ones that have run prisons. Now, a word that's similar to this could be executioners, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems more if you're the head of the executioners. In this case, you're not going to execute everybody in your prison. So people, I think, guard might be a
It
head
actually says
bodyguard.
in put them in the custody in the house of the captain of the guard, which would mean,
Well, it's the same phraseology. Chamberlain of the butchers is a translation of the same as captain of the guard.
which makes it sound like it's Potiphar.
Yes, I would say it's Potiphar here, but that's what's going on. It seems like it's the same person. So Joseph, and as you mentioned, Joseph is under the guard, so to speak, of Potiphar, if that's the case, unless that's changed out by this time. So this another translation reads house of the bodyguard.
Ooh. And it says they were in custody for some time. That's before they had their dream. Making it sound like they may have been in there a while.
The word tabak, as we talked about, can be translated as executioner, slaughterer, cook, bodyguard, or guardsman.
I wouldn't want to call my cook a slaughterer.
Slaughter.
I'd want to eat anything he made.
Well, could be he's the one who brings in the meat.
The pig calls the cow. You eat it.
These are Egyptians. Maybe crocodiles. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head, dream interpretation, and restore you to your post. It's very funny to say this. And verse 19, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head from you and hang you on a tree. Birds will eat your flesh from you.
If you say that in Hebrew, would that be like a pun?
I think in English it's a pun also.
Well,
but
I
yeah.
know, but in
Uh-huh.
Hebrew and original, would it still be a pun?
And that's why in the, unfortunately, I don't remember the exact passage, but when they're taking a census, it's literally taking a head
Lifting
count
the head.
and it's lifting the head. And that's why some rabbinic commentators say lifting the head is a threat, that if you don't obey the Torah, your head will be removed from you. I'm just saying that's a commentary.
Yeah, but here a
But-
head was lifted and made over everything. Not,
Or lifted from it and you're killed. That's the same phraseology of lifting the head. In a head count, it's to lift up the head, but the good version is to be counted, the bad version is to be, okay, this is lifted from you. I don't think that comment is accurate about that. I'm just saying that's a commentary says it's saying that the threatening nature of taking on this covenant, so to speak. So Joseph is not remembered for a time. The chamberlain of cupbearers did not remember Joseph, but he forgot him. You think about it, I think the commentary hits it really well. So as the Midrash proceeds another 10 of the verse, only the chamberlain forgot Joseph, but the Holy One, blessed is he, remembered Joseph very well, as events in the next Torah portion will graphically portray. So it's not that everyone forgot Joseph, but that the one he had counted on, the human part of the story, forgot about him. But it shows, I think, from what we can look at and from Joseph's perspective was true, is that maybe his human counterpart forgot him, but Yah never did. Yah never forgot him at all, even though everything showed that he's been, he was sold into slavery, and now he's worse than that. He's in the prison. He was enslaved. He's an enslaved prisoner, which is worse than.
well, he was head of the prisoners, though, wasn't
Right. Still.
he? That wasn't the worst of the prisoners.
Hi, guys.
Hey,
I've heard some, well, they were preachers actually, say that portray this as, see, he didn't have faith in God, so he tried to bring it about himself by telling one who was released, oh, tell Pharaoh about me. or tell your master about me. So he can come deliver me. He's trying to get himself delivered
Well, as we see,
instead of having
I would
faith.
say it'll be done at the appointed time. Because at the appointed time, the cupbearer does remember and tells
Yeah.
Pharaoh. But that was at the appointed time. I don't agree with that idea. I
I don't
think
either.
that
I'm just saying I heard that
yeah, well, sure,
a lot.
that's a a
You
pastoral
should just shut
commentary.
up and let God do his thing.
Okay,
It's the way it was portrayed, not the way I would.
yeah, I think that Yah, even in this case, though, an angel didn't appear to him and say, "Let's go, we're out of jail," right? It was at the word of the cupbearer, the one he had said, "Remember me." He didn't remember him at that time, but he did later. So, his faith was, you could say, well, it was. I mean, no matter how you look at it, it's just it was the same event. The cupbearer told Pharaoh. It just was later than Joseph wanted it.
What sparked the cupbearer to do that? God sent a dream to Pharaoh.
Yeah. So, what are your questions, or whatever else you'd like to discuss in this Torah portion? Yes.
Okay, the way Joseph phrases the please remember me to the cupbearer. I've used phrasing like that all the time. And usually when I use that phrase in the way A phrases it, I usually mean sometime in the future.
When the time is right.
Because I don't know because I don't know what's going to happen later.
I think from context, we'd see that Joseph meant for it to happen right away, or at least was quite hopeful that it would be. I mean,
Or like a couple
maybe
of
maybe that's just me reading myself into the text too. We're not really told exactly what he meant by that, but we do see that he was forgotten, and so it seems that we're told that Yah didn't forget him, and that he was forgotten by human element, but not by Yah. And so I think there is kind of baked into the text that it was a time window when this would come about. It just was not at that time that he wanted it to. Like a lot of things, in life, there are things we say we want this, and when do we want it? We want it now, but it wasn't the right time. Wasn't the right time for it. So next Shabbat, I don't
Is
know.
that where our portion ended?
It's where our
Yes.
portion ended.
Yep.
In chapter 40, at least. There's not the very. What's the last verse I have here? 40 verse 23, which is pretty near the end of our portion.
Yeah, the last
I
verse.
think that's the last verse. Like 20 to 23 was the maftir. So next Shabbat is we'll continue on this, but what we're looking at doing for next Shabbat, even though we have to kind of make a weather call, because I think that weather's gonna make it bad on supposedly on Friday the 24th.
You
Or
believe,
I'm sorry, Friday the 23rd, I think is what it is.
you believe the weatherman?
I'm just saying I look at what he says or what she says with interest. But we're planning on a Hanukkah get together next Shabbat. Hanukkah starts tomorrow night on the traditional calendar. Goes for 8 days, or if you want to look at it, 8 nights.
Crazy nights.
Well, we typically try to do things less crazy, but we'll have a fun time. So we'll probably spend less time midrashing and more time spinning rails or whatever.
Doesn't look like we're having a Christmas Eve party though.
Well, let's all not wear anything in the colors green or red.
I've only got one dress that's green, and it's puff sleeves.
So don't wear it.
Not really sure.
I'm just, that was joking. I was only responding to the idea of, don't, I guess you could say don't
I
get,
don't really have any red dresses at all. I've got blue. I've got the green one. Well, most ones that are like bowl type gowns is blue ones I'm currently wearing. The black and pink one. And the green one. That's it.
Well,
The other ones are just like casual type dresses. Those I usually wear to work.
We don't celebrate Christmas as what most people celebrate it as, because the timing is pretty close to being about right for his conception. So we tend to cover all the stuff up to that point.
let's pray. We thank you for allowing us to Midrash on your word. Thank you for the wisdom that you've given us and the freedom we have to do it. We thank you in Yeshua's name. Amen.